Once more onto the breach, my friends. This is Peter Svidler recording the final recap video for today for me. A video about the game played in round 4, featuring the world champion Magnus Carlsen with the black pieces against the promising young Dutchman and Thomas Shelby lookalike Jordan van Foreest. As you can see, their lifetime record is 1-0 in favor of Magnus. Magnus has convincingly beaten Jordan in the previous edition of the Tata Steel Wijk aan Zee tournament in 2019, where Jordan went for the sharpest knight d5 Sveshnikov there is, straight after Magnus spent countless hours preparing and repeating those lines for his world championship match against Fabiano Caruana. And that did not go well for the young Dutchman. He got a reasonable position out of the opening, but just wasn't familiar enough with the emerging structures to compete with Magnus's superior understanding, and went down in flames. So let's see how that their game transpired in 2020. Once again, Jordan opens with 1e4, and here we have to mention a little bit of a subplot. This was obviously round 4, and Jordan had 2 whites in the previous 3 games, and he won both of them playing the Alapin. He in round 1 he had the Alapin after knight f3, e6, c3, and won a nice little game. And in round 3, after knight f3, knight c6, and once again c3, he has beaten Daniil Dubov. So 2 out of 2 with the Alapin for Jordan, and we were waiting with bated breath for Magnus to finally show us how to refute the blasted thing, because it's been haunting generations upon generations of Sicilian players, and we were bitterly disappointed on that count, because Magnus opted to play 1e5, knight f3, knight c6, knight bishop c4, knight f6, knight g5. And this is actually already quite remarkable, because the meta in the Italian these days is very much that you start with bishop c5. But as Jan Gustafsson in his Chessable series on 1e4, e5 explains, by starting with knight f6, you actually cut down on a number of options for white. In particular, you don't really need to worry about this position, and more importantly this position, which is very much part of today's opening debate, and it's not that easy for black to play actually. By playing knight f6, you also clearly allow a few things. You allow 4d4, which you need to know what to do against, but that's generally considered not to be a very problematic line for black at all. And of course you need to be prepared against knight g5, which is sort of a very old classical theory, which disappeared, more or less completely disappeared from high-level grandmaster practice, and is now being reintroduced due, I think, to the prevalence of computer analysis more than anything else. d5, ed5, knight a5, bishop b5 check, c6, dc, bc, and in particular this move bishop d3. It's not the only move in the position, but it is what people seem to be doing these days more than anything else. I think the previous attempt to reintroduce knight g5 against the 2 knights has been made by Nigel Short. I think he was the most notable proponent of this, and was connected with the idea of playing knight h3, the move, I think, which was first introduced, of course, by Fischer, but then once again disappeared. And I think then Nigel tried to once again prove that this is good for white. But these days, bishop d3 is very much the main move. Once again, doing Jan's promo work for him, covered in great detail in Jan's new series. Black has 2 options here. The knight on g5 needs to be chased away, and it needs to be chased away creating space to play f7, f5. So you either play knight g4 or you play knight g5, and knight g5 is, I think, universally accepted to be stronger here. Knight f3, bishop d6. And here the main move for white, I think, is supposed to be castles, after which black also castles, and there's all kinds of very sharp positions which can arise here after rook e1, for instance. It's possible to sacrifice even the second pawn on e5 for a lot of tempi here. And there's been actually even some recent grandmaster traffic in this position. But Jordan goes for the move knight c3, which is, I think, prior to that game, a lot less well known and a lot less analyzed than castles, but once again quite well covered by Jan and his chessable series. And Jan's conclusion was that black has to play f7, f5 here, pushing for this large pawn center as early as possible. And the black actually is fine. But Magnus chooses either not to discuss the most central variation because he didn't really want to compare notes against the young Dutchman, or perhaps he couldn't entirely remember what to do against knight c3 because, as mentioned, it is not the main move in this position. So he chose to castle. White now doesn't castle into f5, which would transpose to positions which black, I think, would quite like to play, but plays bishop e2. And this obviously gives white the option to play d3 later on, stopping the most important idea black has here of advancing as fast as possible with f5 and d4. In particular, f5 is quite well met here by d2, d3. So Magnus goes knight f4, castles, bishop g4, all of this very natural. d3, knight takes e2, queen takes e2, and f5. And here I tried figuring out what happens if white makes some kind of a, lukewarm move like queen e3, aiming to just unpin the queen and play slowly. And the computer instantly says that after something like queen c7 here, intending rook a8 and perhaps then knight b7, with ideas of bishop c5, or just generally including the one last bet piece black has on the board, this knight on a5 into the game, black is more or less fine instantly. But Jordan was extremely well prepared for this game, and he continued blitzing. He went h3, bishop g6, and instant g4. This gauntlet has to be picked up because there's really no other sensible move here. fg4, white goes knight g5. Queen d7 is once again maybe the only real reasonable option black has. Knight ce4. And here Magnus took a very, very practical decision and went for an endgame which is not good for him, but which you can play sort of using his wealth of experience and his general understanding. You can start to play sensibly instead of trying to compete against the computer evaluations. The computer actually suggests that black's best choice here is to play h6, knight takes d6, queen takes d6, hg, hg, gh. Black is already a pawn down, I mean, has been a pawn down for a while, but remains a pawn down here. Also has this absolutely fabulous pawn structure, and I use fabulous in the loosest possible sense here. But it turns out that the position after something like this is not that easy for white to convert into a full point, and might actually be, once again, I didn't click for long enough to reach a definitive conclusion, but I have a feeling in a game between two engines, this probably ends in a draw more than it ends in a white victory, because of how unsafe this king is, and also there's always going to be plenty of counterplay against the f2 pawn on the f file and the h5 pawn, and this knight is very much headed towards much greener pastures around the d4 and f4 squares. But it's very difficult, I think, to choose to go for this position if you don't know that it's good. Well, for a given value of good, it's not really good. It might be okay in the sense that you maybe don't lose. So Magnus goes for something else. He goes bishop e7, knight g3, driving the bishop away from h5. If you play g6, white is very happy to just pick up the pawn on e5, attacking the knight. So bishop g6 played, queen takes g4, and Magnus just snap takes on g4 and plays c6, c5. And here black is a pawn down, but you can start seeing some outlines of positional compensation for him. He wants to play c5, c4, attacking attacking this very solid structure white has on the queen side. And finally, the knight from a5 is heading towards better squares. Knight 5 e4 is a very natural, obvious choice for white here, knight c6. And here, Jordan played bishop e3, which is a perfectly sensible decision. He could also play c3. We were looking at this during the live broadcast, but we were not connecting it with the most direct idea. In fact, after c3, it's not even good for black to attack the pawn on d3. He should play knight d8, aiming knight e6, and then some kind of a position like this is likely to arise on the board, which I suspect should be easier to, like, I think the white win is likelier here than a draw, but once again, two bishops always provide black with defensive possibilities, and I'm not prepared to say that white is winning here, but white definitely is the only side that is ever going to play for a win here. It's an unpleasant endgame for black. But I just wanted to show you a very cute idea on how to deal with, let's say, rook, in particular, rook a d8. White goes bishop e3, rook takes d3, and here we were trying to calculate some kind of a mess starting from bishop takes e5, rook takes g3, but it's completely unnecessary. You can just play rook fd1 here. If you trade on g3, I think it's quite obvious that, I mean, on g1, a position like this where this pawn is very weak and also white is about to penetrate along the d-file is just horrible. So the hope has to be to play c5, c4. And here, once again, the machine offers a very neat little trick based on the en passant rule, playing b4, exactly here, where taking en passant will lose to rook takes g3. And if you don't take and start by trading rooks, you will no longer be allowed. To take, and white ends up with a tremendous advantage. In particular, because, as I mentioned, against rook a d8 and not rook f d8, there is an immediate threat here of b5 before b5 and bishop takes a7. But as I said, I don't want to criticize bishop e3, which is what Jordan played. It's also a perfectly fine move. Knight d4, rook a c1, rook a c8. The computer suggests that maybe some attention here has to be paid to the idea of playing knight d2, perhaps even b3, but knight d2 in particular, saying the e4 square is under enough control here that I want to play something like king g2 and then knight c4, making sure that the c-file never actually gets opened. But once again, king g2, which is what Jordan played, is not a mistake. c4, takes. I quite like the idea of playing f2, f3 here, because it is a move that white often wants to make, making doubly sure that nothing ever hangs in the center. And here, the move Magnus made is probably, you can consider, a slight inaccuracy, but the position is quite bad. Black sort of achieved the most he could achieve. He connected his, I mean, there were two weaknesses on c5 and e5, and they are now connected and one square further into the white camp. But this pair of connected knights on g3 and e4 are extremely powerful, and it's very, very difficult to get any counterplay going, because the knights just control most of the important squares here. It's probably still better to play something like a5, but Magnus here plays rook c6, which is a very natural move, and the reason I'm saying it might be an inaccuracy will become obvious in a second. But it's also a bit of a gamble, because the best reply white has in this position is actually to play b3, allowing bishop a3, which is exactly what black was looking for, at least some kind of an active move to make. And now sacrificing this exchange with d takes c4, bishop takes c1, and rook takes c1. And in general, black would very much like in these types of positions to very quickly play rook f4, followed by rook c8, f8, at least putting some pressure against the pawn on f3. And having played rook c6, black basically killed off at least a full tempo compared to, let's say, the position that could appear on the board if white played b3 one move earlier. Here, black actually gets to play rook f4 and play rook cf8 instantly. Despite all that, the computer still thinks that this position is quite significantly better for white. Which is to say that with what amounts to at least like a tempo and a half in white's favor in comparison here. F3 is a very useful move, and I think you can make an argument that rook c6 is a move that black would like to take back in this position. White just gets to play rook d1 very soon, and then starts pushing on the queen side. c5 and d4 is a very strong idea, planning to eventually land the knight on d6, and there's just really no source of counterplay for black at all here. And Magnus himself in the post-game interview admitted that he thought the position after d takes c4 is close to, or maybe actually is completely lost. But Jordan understandably decides that his position is sort of good enough anyway, and why would he need to sacrifice material? And goes rook c1, and that actually improves black's situation quite significantly, because he is now in full possession of the c-file and can start creating counterplay against the white queen side. And in this position, Jordan makes sort of a final mistake, which sort of made sure that he was not going to win that game playing rook f2. It's understandable that he wanted to control the second file, the second rank, but allowing bishop c1 is quite clearly a misplay, and from that moment on, I think it became quite clear that Magnus was not going to lose that game and not achieve the unbeaten streak that I think by this point he basically mainly wanted to achieve so that people would stop talking about it. And in the studio we started discussing just how much of a shock it would be for Jordan to kind of adjust to a very, very changed circumstance here and perhaps make sure that he doesn't lose this game. White is obviously still not worse, but the character of the position changed so much that I think it felt to us that it was important for Jordan to assume firm control over happenings here. And he did that by playing knight d2, very good recognition that, at least in practical terms, it's important to make sure he just simplifies and equalizes here. Bishop takes d3, knight c4, a very cute little move, using the knight to interpose between the rook on c6 and the bishop on c1, and also attacking this guy, creating third knight g5. Sorry, knight e5. The computer suggests that bishop g5, knight e5, rook c3 is slightly more precise than what Magnus played, but white still shouldn't lose a position like this if he plays well. After bishop f4, Jordan correctly decided not to bother with the pawn on a5, but instead to go after the bishops. One pair of bishops got traded, knight f5, g6, rook e4, also an important move, bishop g5. And here Jordan had an opportunity to make more or less an immediate draw by taking on d4, bishop e3, knight e6, black has to take, knight takes f8, rook d2, knight e6, rook takes a2, and simply king, let's say g2, h3. And this position is not really at all problematic for white to hold. After all, it is an endgame with equal material, 3 against 3, and people don't often lose 3 against 3 endgames. But Jordan's choice doesn't really spoil anything. He went knight e7 check, king h8, knight c6, not really attacking the pawn on d4 because he could have taken it on a previous move, but mainly attacking the pawn on a5. Bishop e3, rook e2, rook d1, knight takes a5. You cannot currently play d3 because obviously the pawn will get stopped and it doesn't promote. So Magnus played rook g1 check, king h2, rook c1. Once again, you had to move the rook away from g1 because there was a threat of rook takes e3 and king takes g1. And here we were kind of wondering exactly how white should be making a draw, but Jordan correctly assessed that he should not be worried about the pawn queening, played king g2. And Magnus decided not even to check the position after d3. I think it's actually kind of important to take with this rook to make sure that the remaining rook is on e3. Sorry about that error. Is on e3 and not on e2. g1, let's say queen, takes. And because there is no threat to the pawn on f3, which really is the only target on the king side, white can instantly start pushing on the queen side, and Magnus estimated that there's really no chance of him winning this position, and because of that he just decided not to waste anybody's time and went rook g1 check, king h2, rook c1, and the game was agreed drawn. A very, very interesting game between the young Dutch talent and the world champion, and also I feel like it will bring additional attention if Jan's chessable E5 series was not enough to bring attention to this line. This game will, I think, bring a lot of attention. I don't know why I moved to that view when there is still something to discuss on the board. The move knight c3, as mentioned, has been a distant second in terms of sort of official popularity in this position, and will now probably become a focus of attention for most people who want to play the two knights with black. So I think it has very, very serious theoretical relevance, and also a very interesting conceptual battle where White replied very concretely to what seemed like definite initiative black had on the king side. A well-played game, which I think will leave Jordan slightly regretful of a missed chance, because he did have a very, very nice position against the world champion, a position he could realistically hope to win. But all in all, he, I think, acquitted himself very well in that game and remains on +1 after 4 rounds going into the rest day, whereas Magnus is still winless going into round 5. But he is a notoriously slow starter, in particular, I think, in Wijk aan Zee tournaments, and has been known to go on an absolute tear once he wins a game somewhere. So we'll see how that particular narrative will progress. On that note, I can finally switch to this and say thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this little series of videos dealing with the games we've seen prior to the rest day, and I hope to see you tomorrow for the live shows starting. I think tomorrow they start half an hour later due to the fact that the games are played. It's a so-called away round with the games played, I think, in Eindhoven or on a inside a football stadium. So I hope to see you during the live show, and there are some promo codes you can use to get discounts on all the fabulous products we have here on Chess24. One of those codes you can now see on your screen. Once again, thanks for watching. Signing off, this has been Peter Svidler for Chess24.